Today's episode of Voiced is from Pro Revenge by Angel Guide Indie and is about a sister's journey to reclaim her identity after her fiancé's betrayal during childbirth, which leads to a clever twist of fate. How far will revenge really go when a name is involved? Subscribe if you enjoy. Kinda my revenge, kinda my sisters, both of us really proud. This is gonna be long, so too long didn't read at bottom. Here's our cast. My sister, we'll call her Sara for the story. Sister's ex-boyfriend, Paul. Ex-boyfriend's new wife, Jane. Ex-boyfriend's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe. Oldest brother, Zeke. Our parents and me. When I was 14 and my oldest sister, Sara, was 22, we found out that she was pregnant with Paul, her boyfriend of 4 years. They immediately got engaged and they were really happy. For a time, Sara had a horrible pregnancy. About 16-18 weeks in the wonder of creating a human life evaporated within her. She developed hyperemesis, which, if you do not know, is really bad morning sickness. She was constantly in pain. She developed gestational diabetes and just all around hated the experience. Around this time, Paul, the then fiancé, started getting sick of the complaining. I believe the argument was, your body is built to do this. It can't be that bad. Sara was due around Valentine's Day, and Paul's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, were very excited, both about the grandchild and the fact that he could be born on a holiday. Sara was very against that and really hoped that her son wouldn't be born on a holiday, even one as small as Valentine's Day. Her birthday sometimes falls on Easter, and she hates it, because it might make him feel that his day isn't very much about him. Mrs. Doe suggested, well, if you name him Valentine or Valentino, then that'll make the day even more special to him. Sara hated the idea. She thought it was tacky that he'd be bullied for it, and she just really didn't like the name Valentino. Paul loved it, but agreed to go with a more average name like Daniel or Jared. Fast forward to February, and she was ready to get this over with. Sara had officially been put on bed rest because while standing or walking, her blood pressure took unexpected spikes and dips. I look back now and goodness do I feel bad for her. She was doing her best to avoid giving birth on Valentine's Day because, again, she didn't want him born on a holiday. Unfortunately, births happen when they happen, and that baby was going to come on Valentine's Day, whether she wanted him to or not. I remember waiting out in the waiting room with my dad, brothers, and Paul, who couldn't stand to be in the delivery room because it was gross. I was so mad that he could have gone in but wouldn't because he thought my sister was gross while giving birth, whereas I had to stay outside because I was too young to go in with my mom and other sister. Dad went home with the youngest 2 brothers while the oldest, Zeke, stayed to watch me because I refused to leave. 16 hours after Sara went into labor, my little nephew was officially part of the family on the evening of Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, Sara was not okay. She had to have an emergency cesarean section, and while doing the operation discovered that the back of her uterus, facing her spinal cord, had a very large and very severe, thankfully non-cancerous tumor. When I say large, I mean it was twice the size of a standard uterus. The doctors were shocked and didn't understand why nobody had noticed it on an ultrasound. It accounted for her severe back pain and blood pressure issues. The doctors immediately went in for more surgery to remove the tumor, but sadly ended up having to perform a full hysterectomy. This meant that my nephew would be Sara's only child. Now, while Sara was in for surgery, Paul was taking care of everything baby-related to make sure his son was okay. In my 14-year-old self's memory, I remember him being suitably distraught, but I didn't really pay him much mind and spent my time in the waiting room with my mother and other sister. Zeke, however, wanted to be a good future brother-in-law and make sure that Paul was okay. He found Paul filling out the baby paperwork on his own looking, in my brother's words, like he had not a single worry in his mind. Zeke asked why Paul didn't wait for Sara to fill out the paperwork as she should have been out of surgery within the hour, and Paul said that he just wanted her to get her rest and heal. That checked out with Zeke, as he was 16 and didn't know any better at the time. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. No, he wouldn't. He knows how much she hates that name, and still, she'd need to sign the paperwork too. My fellow people of Reddit, I regret to inform you that Paul forged Sara's signature on the paperwork and waited until she was out of surgery to hand said paperwork over. My sweet nephew, who was born on Valentine's Day, was named Valentino on his first official birth certificate. I still to this day don't know why Paul and his family were so insistent about the name. He had even picked out a different one with my sister. And before you ask, no, he was never brought up on forgery charges because his parents were witnesses to her signing the papers, even though they only got there at the last minute. So Sara dumped him and got her son's name changed a month later. She was willing to do split custody with him because that's her son's father and she wants the kid to know him. But Paul vanished, and she never heard anything back, which seemed weirdly out of character to us. Until a mutual friend on Facebook was tagged in his wedding pictures 6 months later. Paul had apparently started cheating on her not long after she got pregnant. Sara was livid, but there wasn't much she could do, so she filed for child support and continued to live her best life. Until 6 years later. This is where the revenge starts, my friends. So Sara has been a single mother for the past 6 years and has been amazing at it. At this point in my career, I've been a hairdresser for about 8 months at our local Great Clips. I'm working one day, and who is seated before me but Jane, Paul's wife, herself. I take her back for a trim, and she clearly has no idea who I am. That adds up because a mutual friend that still keeps in contact with Paul said that Jane doesn't know a thing. She has no idea about Sara, that she was the other woman, or that Paul actually has a kid that he's been, infrequently, paying child support for. She's in the dark on it all. I told myself not to be unpleasant and treat her like a normal customer, which I did. Now at this point, Jane was heavily pregnant, so a lot of our conversation was about that. She loved being pregnant, but it was hard. Her husband was so unsympathetic, big shocker, and she was due in 10 weeks, and they still hadn't picked out a name for their baby girl. Ladies and gentlemen, this was my chance. I asked what kind of name she was looking for, and she said, I want something unique and unusual, but not ridiculous like Braintlahey. You know the ones I'm talking about. And Paul had suggested so many already, and she didn't like any of them. So I, conniving little weasel I am, said, what about Sara? My sister's name isn't actually Sara. She was named after an older family member that passed not long after she was born, but there was no female equivalent for his name, so our parents created one. It's a beautiful name and just what Jane was looking for. She loved it, she stuck by it, and I found out by stalking her Facebook months later that she had put her foot down about it, and that was their daughter's name. Now Paul has a daughter with his ex's name to remind him every day about her, and to also remind him to pay his child support. Little nephew is 10 years old now, with a new name and no contact with his biological father, though we do still sometimes call him Val as a family nickname. He likes it, but doesn't want to bring it to school, so it's staying a family nickname. Sara pretends to hate when we call him that, in a joking way. As long as he likes it, she doesn't have a problem with it, and she's seeing a new guy who's really great and like a father to Val. Too long didn't read. My sister's baby daddy forged her signature on paperwork while she was in surgery to name their son a name that she had been avidly against from the beginning, then broke all contact when she dumped him and married the girl he was cheating on her with while she was pregnant. 6 years later, I meet his wife and convince her to name her daughter my sister's name because the wife has no idea my sister and her son exist. Edit. Gosh, now I know what they mean about rest in peace inbox. Thank you to the kind strangers for all the awards, especially the gold. We did not expect this to blow up like it did. Val wanted to let all you other Valentine's babies know that he feels your pain. Weh, talk about a wild roller coaster of emotions. This story is a prime example of how some people just can't handle the consequences of their actions. Paul thought he could just waltz in and make decisions on behalf of Sara, but boom, revenge served cold with a side of cleverness. Naming that baby after Sara? Genius. Now he gets a daily reminder of what he lost. I love how this sister stood up for her family and turned the tables on old Paul. Talk about poetic justice. So, what do you all think? Is this revenge sweet enough, or did it take it a little too far? Drop your thoughts below. Let's chat about it. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Voiced. If you enjoy daily, high-quality stories, please like and subscribe to show your support.